People like you don't belong here. Evelyn's voice cut through the hum of the airport terminal like a knife. Her words, sharp and full of venom, turned heads and silenced conversations. Standing just a foot away from Private First Class Darius Williams, she jabbed her finger in the air toward him, her frustration spilling over into outright hostility. "This is exactly the problem with people like you," she sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You think you can wear that uniform and suddenly you're better than the rest of us. But you don't belong here." Darius, dressed in his military uniform and carrying a heavy duffel bag, stood rooted to the spot. His calm face betrayed no emotion, but inside, he felt the familiar sting of prejudice. After serving his country overseas for over a year, this was the welcome he was receiving on home soil. Evelyn wasn't done. Her insults grew harsher, more pointed, as she gestured wildly. She accused him of being lazy, ungrateful, and undeserving of the respect his uniform represented. Her words carried the unmistakable weight of years of ingrained prejudice, and the crowd around them began to take notice. The tension escalated when Evelyn stepped closer, raising her hand as if she might strike him. The crowd collectively held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. Some people whispered to each other, their expressions a mix of shock and disapproval. A few began to pull out their phones, recording the scene unfolding before them. Darius stood tall, his expression calm but resolute. He had faced worse during his deployment, but there was something deeply cutting about experiencing this kind of hatred in his own country. He didn't say a word, knowing that anything he said could make the situation worse. The atmosphere around Gate 14 was electric with unease, and Evelyn's anger burned hotter with every passing second. To her, Darius wasn't a soldier or a hero. He was simply a target for her frustrations, a symbol of everything she thought was wrong with the world. As the commotion at Gate 14 settled, Evelyn stormed off, muttering under her breath. She ignored the disapproving stares from the other passengers, brushing them off as unwarranted judgments. She told herself she was right. She had every reason to confront Darius. Yet, deep down, the tension in her chest wouldn't go away. She didn't understand why the scene replayed in her mind over and over as she sat at her gate, waiting for her flight. Darius, on the other hand, moved on quietly. He adjusted his duffel bag and found a seat near his gate, pretending to scroll through his phone. His mind, however, was elsewhere. He thought about how moments like this always seemed to find him, no matter where he was or what he had accomplished. He had served his country, risked his life, and earned the right to wear his uniform with pride. Yet here he was, judged not by his actions, but by the color of his skin. Passengers who had witnessed the incident whispered among themselves. Some tried to comfort Darius with nods of solidarity or small words of support, but he wasn't in the mood for conversation. He remained quiet, focusing on getting home to his family. He wasn't going to let one angry woman ruin his homecoming. Meanwhile, Evelyn boarded her flight, sitting in first class and sipping her coffee as the plane ascended. She flipped through the in-flight magazine, determined to shake off the events of the morning. But as the hours passed, the memory of Darius's calm, unwavering face stayed with her. She began to feel uneasy, a gnawing sensation she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she wondered if she had gone too far. Later that evening, Evelyn returned home to her quiet suburban neighborhood. She unpacked her bags and sat down in her living room, scrolling through her phone. A news alert caught her attention. The headline read, "Black Soldier Faces Racism at Airport, Shocking Incident Caught on Camera." Her stomach sank as she clicked the link. The video had gone viral, showing the entire confrontation from start to finish. Her sharp words, her raised hand, and Darius's calm composure were all there for the world to see. The comments were brutal. How can someone be so hateful? This man fought for her freedom, and this is how she treats him? Disgusting behavior. She needs to be held accountable. Evelyn's face turned pale as she realized the full weight of her actions. It wasn't just the insults or the raised hand. It was the way she had reduced a man who had served his country to nothing more than a target for her anger. She felt exposed, her carefully constructed image of herself crumbling under the judgment of strangers online. Darius, meanwhile, had arrived home to a hero's welcome. His family greeted him with open arms, showering him with love and gratitude. But even in the warmth of his home, he couldn't shake the events of the morning. He tried to focus on his family, but his mind wandered back to the anger in Evelyn's eyes. It wasn't the first time he had experienced racism, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But something about this encounter felt different, as if it marked a turning point in his life. Evelyn couldn't sleep that night. The video continued to spread, and she began receiving messages from friends and family asking if it was really her in the footage. Some defended her, while others expressed disappointment. For the first time, she felt the consequences of her actions in a way she never had before. Evelyn spent the entire night tossing and turning. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Darius's calm, unwavering expression as her words lashed out at him. She saw the looks of judgment from the crowd, the whispers, the man who had stepped forward to stop her. By the time the sun rose, her carefully built world of denial had started to crumble. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter as she sipped her morning coffee. Friends, co-workers, and even distant relatives were reaching out. Some were furious, others were shocked, and a few tried to excuse her actions. But the messages Evelyn couldn't ignore were the ones filled with disappointment. One old friend wrote, "I saw the video. I don't know who you've become, but this isn't the Evelyn I once knew." The video had spread like wildfire overnight. News outlets had picked it up, using it as another example of the deep racial tensions still present in the country. Social media platforms were filled with debates, anger, and even calls for Evelyn to be publicly held accountable. Her name wasn't mentioned in the initial post, but it wouldn't take long for people to identify her. She could feel the walls closing in. Meanwhile, Darius sat in his childhood home, surrounded by his family. His mom had cooked his favorite meal, and his sisters had decorated the house with banners that read "Welcome Home." Laughter filled the living room as stories were shared, but Darius's mind was elsewhere. One of his younger cousins sat next to him and showed him the viral video. "It's everywhere," the boy said, shaking his head. "People are standing up for you, though." Darius watched the clip, the moment playing back like a bad dream. He didn't want the attention. He had come home to rest, not to become the face of a viral incident. Yet, as he scrolled through the comments, he felt a mixture of gratitude and frustration. Many people supported him, but others tried to twist the narrative, questioning his right to wear the uniform. Darius sighed deeply, putting the phone down. His mother noticed his somber mood and sat beside him. "Don't let this steal your peace," she said softly. "You've done nothing wrong, and you've got people who love and respect you." Darius nodded, but the weight of the moment lingered. He couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn's face, her anger, her hatred, and the deeper pain he sensed behind it. He wondered if she regretted what she had done or if she was doubling down, convincing herself she was right. By mid-afternoon, Evelyn couldn't ignore the calls anymore. Her boss had left her a voicemail demanding an explanation. Several people had already recognized her in the video and shared her name online. She turned off her notifications, but it didn't stop the growing storm around her. She sat in her living room, staring at her reflection in the dark screen of her television. For years, Evelyn had told herself she wasn't racist. She believed she was just honest and traditional. But now, the world was forcing her to confront something she had always avoided, her own prejudice. She thought about her late husband, a man who had prided himself on their family's values. He had often told her stories of how the world was changing for the worse, blaming immigrants and minorities for society's problems. Evelyn had adopted his views without question, never stopping to consider if they were right or fair. But the man in the airport, the soldier she had humiliated, wasn't the villain she had been taught to see. He was just a man trying to get home. At the same time, Darius received a message from an old army buddy who had seen the video. "You okay?" the text read. Darius hesitated before replying, typing and deleting several responses. Finally, he wrote, "I'm fine, just trying to move past it." His buddy responded, "It's not just about you, though. People need to see what's still happening out here. You're making a difference, whether you want to or not." Darius put the phone down and stared out the window. He didn't feel like a hero or a symbol. He was just a man who wanted to go home and live his life. But deep down, he knew his friend was right. What happened at the airport was part of a bigger story, and whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. As evening fell, Evelyn sat at her computer, debating what to do. She thought about writing a statement or making a public apology, but the words wouldn't come. Every draft felt hollow, like an attempt to save face rather than make amends. She stared at the blank screen, feeling more lost than she ever had before. Meanwhile, Darius made a quiet decision. He would speak out, not to call out Evelyn or seek revenge, but to share his experience and help others understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end of hatred. He called a local journalist who had reached out and agreed to give an interview. By the next morning, Evelyn's name and face were all over the internet. The viral video had been shared millions of times, and her identity had been uncovered. She avoided leaving the house, afraid of the judgment that seemed to lurk around every corner. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, ranging from outrage to offers of support from like-minded individuals. But it was the criticism that stuck with her, the scathing comments, the disbelief, the raw anger from people who saw her actions for what they truly were. She sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through the comments under the video. Some were brutally direct, calling her hateful and cruel. Others were quieter but no less cutting, questioning how someone could behave like that toward a soldier, a man who had risked his life for the country. Evelyn felt trapped. She didn't know how to respond or if she even could. A small, defiant part of her wanted to defend herself, to say she had been stressed or misunderstood. But deep down, another voice, one she had long ignored, began to whisper, "What if they're right?" Meanwhile, Darius was preparing for his interview with the local journalist. He had agreed to meet at a park near his mother's house, a place that felt calm and familiar. He didn't want to make the story about himself, but he felt a responsibility to share his perspective, to shine a light on the experiences of so many others who faced racism every day. When the journalist arrived, she greeted him warmly and asked if he was comfortable sharing his story. Darius nodded, his calm demeanor masking the mix of emotions inside. He spoke honestly about what had happened at the airport, describing the pain of being reduced to nothing more than the color of his skin, even while wearing the uniform of a soldier. It wasn't the first time something like this has happened, Darius admitted, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. But every time, it cuts a little deeper. You start to wonder what else you have to do to be seen as equal, to be respected as a person. The journalist listened intently, her questions thoughtful and compassionate. She asked how he felt about the video going viral and whether he wanted Evelyn to face consequences for her actions. "I'm not looking for revenge," Darius said firmly. "What happened wasn't just about me. It's about a much bigger issue in this country. If this can start a conversation, if it can make even one person think twice about how they treat someone else, then maybe something good can come out of it." Evelyn saw the interview later that evening. A news anchor summarized Darius's words, and the footage showed him sitting under a tree, his uniform crisp and his posture proud. She watched in silence as he spoke about his experiences and his hope for change. There was no anger in his voice, no desire to humiliate her in return. Instead, there was a quiet dignity that made her chest tighten with shame. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to truly see the man she had insulted. Not as a target for her frustration or as a symbol of everything she thought was wrong with the world, but as a human being with his own story, his own struggles, and his own worth. The realization hit her like a wave, leaving her breathless and unsteady. She turned off the television and sat in the dark, her hands trembling. The anger that had fueled her actions at the airport was gone, replaced by a hollow ache she didn't know how to fill. She thought about what Darius had said, about using the moment as an opportunity for growth and understanding. For the first time, she wondered if she could do the same. The next day, Evelyn drafted an email to the journalist who had interviewed Darius. She introduced herself and admitted she was the woman in the video. She asked if there was any way she could speak to Darius directly, not to excuse herself, but to apologize and try to make amends. She hesitated before hitting send. Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Finally, she clicked the button, sending the message out into the world. At the same time, Darius was reflecting on the overwhelming response to his interview. Messages of support had poured in from friends, strangers, and even other soldiers who shared their own experiences with racism. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, but he also felt the weight of the moment. He knew this wasn't just about him, it was about changing a culture, one conversation at a time. When the journalist forwarded Evelyn's email to him, he read it carefully, his emotions swirling. Part of him didn't want to hear from her at all. But another part, the part his mother had raised to believe in forgiveness and growth, wondered if this could be the beginning of something meaningful. After a long moment, he replied, agreeing to meet her. Evelyn sat at the cafe table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had arrived 30 minutes early, her nerves making her restless. The clinking of cups and quiet hum of conversation around her did little to calm her racing thoughts. She replayed the airport incident in her mind over and over, wishing she could take back every word, every gesture. She had spent the last 2 days trying to understand how she had let herself become that person. The journalist who had facilitated the meeting assured her Darius had agreed to come. Evelyn wasn't sure what to expect. Would he be angry? Cold? Would he even believe her apology? She wasn't sure she deserved forgiveness, but she knew she had to try. The door opened, and Evelyn looked up to see Darius walk in. His tall frame and military posture made him stand out immediately. He scanned the room, his gaze calm but firm, until he saw Evelyn. She stood quickly, feeling small under his steady eyes. Darius walked over and extended his hand. For a moment, Evelyn hesitated, unsure if she deserved the gesture. Then, she shook his hand, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "Thank you for coming." They sat down, the tension between them palpable. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I was wrong, so wrong, and I can't undo what I said, but I want you to know I regret every word." Darius listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. He had been unsure about this meeting, wondering if it was worth his time. But as Evelyn spoke, he sensed something genuine in her tone, a vulnerability that seemed uncharacteristic of the woman who had insulted him so harshly. "I've spent the last few days thinking about what happened," Evelyn continued. "And I've realized I've spent my whole life seeing the world in a way that isn't fair. I've let my anger and my prejudices control me. What I said to you wasn't just hurtful, it was hateful. And you didn't deserve that." Darius leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the table. He could see the sincerity in her words, but forgiveness wasn't something he could offer easily. "Do you understand why it was so painful?" he asked after a long pause. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of years of lived experience. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I think I do," she said. "You've given so much for this country, your time, your energy, your safety, and I treated you like you were nothing. It was wrong, and it was cruel." Darius nodded slightly, appreciating her honesty but still guarded. "It's not just about me," he said. "It's about the millions of people who go through this every day. People who don't have a uniform to protect them, people who face this kind of hate and worse. This isn't just about one moment, it's about a whole history of moments." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. "I don't know how to fix what I've done," she admitted. "But I want to try. I want to learn. I've spent so long being part of the problem, and I don't want to be that person anymore." The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling over them. Finally, Darius spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you right away," he said honestly. "But I appreciate that you're here, that you're trying. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with moments like this." Evelyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll keep trying." not just for your forgiveness, but to be better, for myself and for others." As they left the cafe, Darius felt a small sense of relief. He didn't know if Evelyn would truly change, but he had done his part by opening the door. Evelyn, for her part, felt the first stirrings of hope. She couldn't erase the past, but she could take the first steps toward a better future. In the days following their meeting, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Her apology had been the first step, but she knew it wasn't enough. She needed to act, to prove to herself and others that she was serious about changing. Sitting at her desk late one night, she began researching ways to get involved in communities she had spent her life avoiding. She came across organizations that focused on racial equality, support for veterans, and education about implicit bias. One group, in particular, caught her attention, a local nonprofit dedicated to bridging racial divides through community discussions and volunteer work. Nervously, she signed up for an event that weekend. Meanwhile, Darius returned to his routine, balancing the joy of being home with the lingering attention from the viral video. His interview had sparked conversations far beyond what he had imagined. Messages poured in, not just from supporters, but also from people sharing their own stories of discrimination. It was overwhelming at times, but it also reminded him of the power of speaking out. At the same time, Darius couldn't help but think about Evelyn. He wasn't sure if her regret was genuine or if it was just a response to public backlash. But something about her tearful apology at the cafe had felt real. He hoped she would take what she learned and use it to make a difference. On Saturday morning, Evelyn arrived at the community event. It was held in a church basement, with a mix of people from different backgrounds sitting in a circle. She hesitated at the door, clutching her bag tightly, but then forced herself to step inside. The room was warm and inviting, filled with the sound of quiet conversation. The facilitator, a black woman in her 40s, welcomed Evelyn with a smile and guided her to a seat. The event began with everyone sharing why they had come. When it was Evelyn's turn, she felt her throat tighten. She took a deep breath and began. I'm here because I need to change," she said, her voice trembling. "A few days ago, I did something terrible. I hurt someone with my words and my actions, and I've realized how much I need to unlearn the hate I've carried with me for so long. I want to listen. I want to understand." The room was quiet for a moment, then the facilitator nodded. "Thank you for being honest. Change starts with recognizing where we've gone wrong." As the session continued, Evelyn listened intently to the stories of others. She heard about the daily struggles people faced, the pain of being judged by their skin color, and the resilience it took to keep moving forward. For the first time, she truly began to understand what it meant to walk in someone else's shoes. Darius's life took a similar turn. After much thought, he decided to partner with the same nonprofit to lead workshops for veterans and civilians alike. His goal was to share his experiences and foster understanding among people from all walks of life. He was nervous at first, unsure if he could make an impact, but the positive responses encouraged him to keep going. One day, Darius and Evelyn's paths crossed again at one of these workshops. Evelyn was there as a participant, eager to continue her journey of learning. When she saw Darius at the front of the room, her stomach tightened. She hadn't expected to see him again, let alone in a setting like this. Darius noticed her too, his expression unreadable. But as the session went on and Evelyn actively participated, asking thoughtful questions and listening with genuine interest, Darius felt his initial skepticism soften. After the session ended, Evelyn approached him cautiously. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said quietly. "But I'm glad you are. You've helped me see the world differently." Darius nodded. "I'm glad you're still trying," he replied. "It's not an easy road, but it's worth it." Over time, their paths continued to intersect. Evelyn became a regular volunteer at the nonprofit, dedicating herself to bridging divides and addressing her own biases. Darius found a new purpose in advocacy, using his story to inspire others to think differently about race, respect, and equality. The viral video that had sparked so much pain became a catalyst for growth, not just for Evelyn and Darius, but for countless others who saw it and began their own journeys of reflection and change. While the scars of the past remained, the future felt a little brighter, a reminder that even in moments of deep division, redemption and understanding were possible.